I suspect the audience for this video will be split into roughly 2 categories. Either you like me and you spend way too much time in online Doctor Who fan spaces and you encounter Thasmin daily, or you're wondering if I just mangled the pronunciation of theremin. If you haven't been watching Doctor Who these past few years, or you've never seen it at all, there's a couple things you should know. First of all, yes, Doctor Who is in fact still on. Secondly, they also cast actress Jodie Whittaker as the first female Doctor. Within the context of the show, the Doctor, an alien, can regenerate into literally anybody, making it a role with a lot of potential castings. Of course, over the years this has mainly resulted in a series of white men. So when the announcement came back in 2017 that they had finally cast the first female Doctor, there was a lot of excitement. I was excited, and then quickly disappointed. The result for me has been unsatisfactory, to say the least, and I've been wanting to talk about the writing on Doctor Who these past few years for a while now, because it has been equal parts fascinating and frustrating. For absolute clarity, I'm specifically talking about the show under head writer and executive producer Chris Chibnall, who took over the show for Series 11 in 2018 and has left just this year in 2022. As you can maybe tell from the bookshelf behind me, I'm kind of in it for the long haul as a fan, so I've thought way too much about the show these past 5 or so years. It's really been relentless. By the time this video is up, Jodie Whittaker's last episode as the Doctor will have just aired, and both she and Chris Chibnall will have departed the show. So it's a good time to talk about all the opinions that have been building up inside my head like a volcano. Central to this, though, is Thasmin, the ship name for the 13th Doctor and her companion Yasmin, nicknamed Yaz, played by actress Mandip Gill. Their relationship, and quasi-sapphic romance, if you can even call it that, has been a major talking point of this era. Important context here is that Yaz, right at the start of January in the New Year's special, came out and confessed romantic feelings for the Doctor.
Have you ever told her?
Told her what?
How you feel about her?
I don't know what to do, Dan. I've never told anyone. Not even myself.
There's going to be a lot of discussion about queer representation and Yaz herself later on, but I want to ease into that by providing some extended context for why I think the writing has been so disappointing. Therefore, I'd like to start with something relatively simple, that being setup and payoff.
I'd say you love that cigar more than you've loved any person.
Good setup to payoff is honestly not even that remarkable when it's done well. This is one of the most basic components of storytelling out there. It's the Chekhov's gun scenario. If a rifle is hanging on the wall in Act 1, it must go off by the end of Act 3. Which makes it especially weird when a major TV show like Doctor Who suddenly can't even clear that bar. Here's what I mean. In Series 11, Episode 2, The Ghost Monument, literally the second episode of the era, the Doctor and her 3 companions are stranded on a desolate planet where everything wants to kill them. There's sniper robots, there's flesh-eating water, there's these burnt pieces of cloth which are sentient. Look, I don't know either. They are in this situation with 2 space racers, Angstrom and Epso, who are competing for a grand prize in the deadliest intergalactic race ever. The Doctor determines that they all need to work together to survive in order to make it to the checkpoint. Solid premise. Okay, here's my main problem. You know that flesh-eating water I mentioned? It is never, and I mean never, relevant. Here are the scenes in question.
Now take your meds. Don't travel at night, and don't drink the water. In fact, don't even touch the water. And this entire planet has been made cruel.
So that's why I said don't touch the water. Flesh-eating microbes, millions of them living in there. Toxic atmosphere, killer water. Very dangerous planet, Yaz. This planet doesn't make any sense. No other life forms except us and the microbes in the water.
From the way the camera lingers on the water to the dialogue drawing attention to the very specific thing it does, you'd think that this water would end up becoming important. Even something as simple as someone falling in the water and getting eaten alive would suffice in terms of paying this mention off. But no! This is in fact the entire appearance of the killer water. I genuinely did not leave out any scene there where the water is mentioned or demonstrated. The characters get on a boat, then they get off a boat, The killer water is entirely incidental, and it is absolutely baffling. What makes it especially noticeable, too, is that within the same episode, there is a well-executed Chekhov's gun already. Take a look.
Have you seen yourself, Epta? I'd say you love that cigar more than you've loved any person.
Have you any idea how rare and expensive these are? It takes half an Althusian lifetime to make just one of these. To make them, roll them, age them, and then, and this is the best bit, they make them self-lighting. Just one click of the finger, and it lights itself.
Now we crush those fears from you.
Enjoy your feast, whatever it is. 'Cause you know what some people like after a feast? Graham! Huh? Not me. Some people.
Do it. Oh, yeah. A nice cigar.
This plot thread about the self-lighting cigar is honestly not mind-blowing. It's no screenwriting revelation, but it stands out in an episode where the payoff for something else just didn't come. The thing about setup and payoff is that audiences are generally attuned to understand if something isn't quite right, even if they don't know what. It's important not to overstate these things because there's always going to be exceptions, but proper payoff, even for the smallest of details, is something that even an average Joe on the street could pick up on if it simply doesn't exist. So let's talk about the opposite of that scenario. Payoff without setup.
Never been good at sprinting.
That's the last one in every race at school.
This may sound weird at first, but bear with me. I promise it'll make sense. The episode we're going to be looking at is part 1 of Spyfall, and yes, that is a James Bond pun, where the cliffhanger reveals in a shock twist that one character is in fact the Doctor's arch-nemesis, the Master. The Master is one of the Doctor's people who can also change their appearance and travel in time, yada yada. Basically the Doctor's Moriarty, who also used to be their best friend / ex. Some context on the episode itself. Throughout the runtime, the Doctor and her companions have been working with a spy called Agent O. He lives off the grid in the Australian desert. He's supposedly got lots of files on the Doctor's life.
I've got a whole shelf over there all about the Doctor. Everything I could gather. A lot of inconsistencies, but it's very, very interesting.
And the characters ask him for help in taking down Vor. Sorry, Vor here is like a big tech company, sort of a parody of Google. It makes things weird at times.
Right now, Vor is more powerful than most nations.
Anyway, Agent O is secretly the Master, and this is how the Doctor manages to catch him out on that.
Come on, Sam! I need to close the door!
Sorry, I've never been good at sprinting.
What? Never been good at sprinting?
That's the last one in every race at school.
No, I read your file. You're a champion sprinter.
Got me. Well done.
To backtrack a little, I should point out that the twist isn't not set up. In fact, it's pretty obvious once you watch the episode back. Stephen Fry's character, the head of MI6, has this clever line when he gets assassinated.
It's possible he became a double agent, or even a triple.
Who for?
And there's other hints here and there, like the files he has on the Doctor, this faked reaction to the TARDIS being bigger on the inside,
Ridiculous.
and so on. But what actually catches the Master out is none of those things, and instead, it's the Doctor knowing that the real Agent O is a champion sprinter.
Never been good at sprinting.
That's the last one in every race at school.
No, I read your file. You're a champion sprinter.
To be clear, this is not mentioned at all before the twist. We don't see the Master as Agent O claim to be a champion sprinter. We don't see the Doctor rattle off his file or whatnot. We are simply told, when it is time to do the cliffhanger, that, oh, by the way, he's a champion sprinter. Suspicious how he can't run, isn't it? If you're a general audience member, you may have picked up on some of the clues that Agent O isn't all that he seems. But you don't get that moment of satisfaction that, oh, I noticed that detail. He said he was a champion sprinter earlier. Instead, the twist happens because, well, the writer knew that the twist was going to happen then. and not because it was threaded throughout the episode itself. It's similar to the rules of fair play murder mystery, where a writer is going to want to make their solution plausibly solvable to their readers. They'll trail enough clues that even if you didn't get it in the end, you can go back and say, oh, of course, how did I miss that? But there's nothing to miss in Spyfall, because we're only told what we need when it's too late. The satisfaction of having picked up on a hidden clue doesn't come, because the audience isn't allowed to see the right clues to begin with. It would be like if in an Agatha Christie novel, the killer was introduced in the final chapter. The twist in Spyfall comes because the writer knew it was meant to come, and hasn't bothered to set it up.
Real people need real jobs. Work gives us purpose, right?
Following on from both the previous sections, let's combine the ideas and talk about Series 11, Episode 7, Kerblam. First, a plot summary. The Doctor and her companions receive an anonymous plea for help and travel to Kerblam, which is basically Space Amazon. We meet Charlie, a fellow janitor, and Kira, who has a pretty interesting outlook on being a corporate wage slave.
If I ever get bored, I imagine customers opening their parcels back on Kandoka. Their big smiles. But I can still imagine families opening these packages. We make them happy by doing what we do here.
You have a great approach to life, Kira.
Anyway, the Doctor discovers that lots of workers are going missing and begins to suspect the company's artificial intelligence system, which operates through these sinister as fuck robots. Meanwhile, Charlie is getting the hots for Kira. The Doctor then confronts the Human Resources Department, who admit to knowing about the disappearances, but claim they'd be trying to investigate them as well. During a brief power outage, one of the robots attacks Charlie, but the Doctor saves him. Kira is then abducted by the robots, who take her to a remote part of the warehouse and give her a gift of bubble wrap. Killer bubble wrap, which explodes people when it's popped. Kira dies, and Charlie is distraught. The Doctor finds a massive army of Kerblam robots, all with this special bubble wrap, ready to teleport away to customers. However, she realizes that it wasn't a human who sent the distress call, but the artificial intelligence of Kerblam itself. Charlie is the real villain, who rigged the bubble wrap to explode and has been forcing the AI to kill people. This is done in protest of rampant automation making human workforces redundant. However, he did not kill Kira, as explained by the Doctor.
Except Kerblam's system does have a conscience. It's been fighting you, Charlie. It knew it. And then Kira. It took her, knowing how you felt about her, to show you how it would feel. Because how you feel right now about Kira is how all those families and friends will feel if your plan goes off.
We also get this line.
The systems aren't the problem. How people use and exploit the system, that's the problem.
The Doctor then rigs the delivery robots to explode, Charlie dies, and the Kerblam management vow to hire more human workers. The end. There is obviously a lot to unpack there, so let's start easy. First, it would be inaccurate to say that Charlie as the main villain is a twist that's not set up. In fact, it's set up pretty well, with the robot that attacks Charlie being the main example here, but there's a couple other minor clues in there. Secondly, this episode is clearly going for a discussion about worker automation, with many references to this littered throughout the dialogue.
So, Kerblam is completely automated?
No, 90% as per Kandokan guidelines. Proud to be a certified 10% people-powered company.
At least I'm working. Unlike half the galaxy. Suppose we would have got ourselves to blame. Whilst we were busy staring at our phones, technology went and nicked our jobs.
10%. They want us to be grateful that 10% of people get to work. What about the other 90%? What about our futures? Because without action, next time it will be 7%, then 5%, then 1%.
Kandokan labor laws. Ever since the people power protest movements, companies have to make sure a minimum 10% of the workforce are actual people at all levels. Like the slogan says, real people need real jobs. Work gives us purpose, right?
I think it's fair to say that it's not intentionally trying to let Space Amazon off the hook, but, well, here's the problem as I see it. The issue isn't in the twist, but in how it tries to throw you off the scent. The Kerblam androids are intentionally framed as sinister throughout the narrative, both figuratively and literally framed by the camera. The episode wants to lead the audience into believing that the real villain are the creepy-looking robots, which is fine. That's standard misdirection. Only, the thing they've chosen to make them look evil is, real-world capitalist horrors? The fictional company of Kerblam is clearly an allusion to Amazon, but that's mostly just window dressing and aesthetic to go along with the automation topic. But it borrows inexplicably from real-world Amazon practices and just doesn't seem to question them.
Relax as I fix your group loop.
Are we under house arrest?
Oh, no. The group loops monitor productivity and report back to the system.
Word of advice. The teammates can hear everything, if they choose.
Everything?
Constant, random monitoring. No such thing as privacy here.
Hello, co-workers. Please confine social interaction to leisure breaks. Great conversation, guys, but unnecessary talking can lead to efficiency reductions. Why not pick up the pace a little?
Everything in the clips I've just shown is never resolved. By framing Kerblam and its artificial intelligence systems in these terms, there exists a staggering dissonance when it's revealed that, actually, they're totally good. They sent that plea for help at the beginning. Do you remember that? When it comes to setup and payoff, the aim should always be to provide a satisfying answer to any of the audience's burning questions. If a viewer finishes the episode and thinks, that makes sense, I should have seen it coming, then you succeeded. You want the audience to buy into the story logic, no matter the genre, so that when they see the whole picture, they can understand how the story unfolded the way it did. It's a classic component of mystery fiction, but I think it applies to lots of different genres. Stories, at their core, tend to have a mystery involved, even if that is as simple as will they, won't they, what will the character choose, or who are Rey's parents. Okay, so my thoughts on J.J. Abrams' whole infamous mystery box structure is best saved for an entirely different video, but the point is, when an audience member watches something, they are usually always going to have questions, consciously or unconsciously. And when you introduce some flesh-eating water and then never mention it again, or your villain misdirect has the character basically endorse Jeff Bezos, there's going to be some frustration from your viewers.
People like me, my generation, we change things. We make things happen.
To return to Kerblam, though, the absolute worst part of it for me, and the thing which just shatters this episode's structure into a million pieces, is the treatment of Kira. If you paid attention to that synopsis, you'll have noticed that it wasn't the ultimate villain Charlie who made the robots kill Kira, but the robots themselves deciding to kill Kira, because it would make Charlie feel sad. To add insult to injury, when the doctor delivers her apparently pro-Amazon screed,
The systems aren't the problem. How people use and exploit the system, that's the problem.
she just up and lets the system off the hook because she's a Bezos shill, I guess? Honestly, I have no idea how no one in the writer's room picked up on the possible implications here. She talks about the automated systems as if it has a conscience, but I generally find that people with a conscience don't murder innocent people in cold blood to make someone else cry. The doctor is weirdly blasé about the fact that the system just straight up fucking murdered someone. It's not just a staggeringly bad piece of writing on every structural level imaginable, it's also one of the most out-of-character moments for the Doctor, who is supposedly a champion for the oppressed.
She always has the weirdest friends.
Okay, I need to go off on a brief tangent here because the baffling lack of episode-to-episode consistency has been haunting my brain ever since Jodie Whittaker's first series. I have no idea how this sort of thing is possible. Here's one big example for me, from the episodes Arachnids in the UK and Kerblam, respectively.
A total conspiracy, and getting worse.
I love a conspiracy. Don't like bullies, don't like conspiracies, don't like people being in danger.
These lines are 2 episodes apart in the same series. It's one thing to, for example, use deliberate inconsistency to say something. You could, for example, have a character after the second line mention the Doctor liking conspiracies 2 episodes ago and pointing out the contradiction. That, of course, does not happen. But if it did, you could make a beat out of showing how this character is indecisive and keeps flip-flopping between extremes based on the situation. For an example in the same series of how this can be done well, in the episode The Witchfinders, the Doctor warns her companions not to interfere in history, but then immediately goes back on that statement when she discovers that someone is about to be dunked for being a witch.
Whatever this is, I need you all to remember the most important thing about dips into the past. Do not interfere with the fundamental fabric of history.
We've got to do something, Doctor.
The doc said don't interfere. You said don't interfere, right?
Meet me on the other side!
So much for not interfering.
But if you don't include that follow-up, it just ends up looking incompetent. Somehow, there was a writer's room on this series. This is what my brain has been dealing with for the last 5 years. I am absolutely obsessed with how weird the writing has gotten.
Me and your beautiful as your unborn child.
And on that note, let's talk about the dialogue, because this era is littered with some of the most shockingly clunky lines I've ever heard delivered on screen. Here's one from the episode Fugitive of the Jadoon.
She's here. The Jadoon have got us in a tractor beam, dragging us on board their ship.
This is frankly not the worst line ever, but it's very indicative of the kind of poor quality we're dealing with. By the time this line appears in the episode, it's already been well established that the main thrust of the plot is simply the Doctor is being hunted by the alien Jadoon, a sort of police force for hire. We even know definitively that the Jadoon are working with this woman, Gat, hence the line of, she's here.
She's here.
The audience should already know what's going on, but we still get that bizarrely clunky line of, the Jadoon have got us in a tractor beam. Even worse, I think, is the fact that, well, this is a science fiction show. The visuals here of a brightly colored laser beam pulling an object up into space is practically codified into the genre. Most everyone should be able to understand what's happening here without the line narrating it to us. Honestly, we don't even need clarification that the Jadoon are controlling it, because that's basically already inferred. There's a lot of dialogue like this that's overly descriptive or expository, often at the expense of the story's flow. Another that comes to mind happens during the episode The Halloween Apocalypse, when new companion Dan sees space from the TARDIS for the first time.
Doesn't make any sense. There's nothing here.
You say nothing?
Yeah. Nothing here. Except an amazing view.
This one, I think, is the case of a screenwriter not fully trusting the visuals to get across the point that we're making. As filmed and acted, we can tell that the view, as the characters say, isn't nothing, but we only need Dan's line there to convey the feeling. Nothing but an amazing view is the intended implication already, making the line functionally redundant. Describing what is basically already happening on screen is a weirdly common trend. There's so many examples that I can think of, and I can't talk about all of them. So here's a montage of some of the ones that I came up with.
Jump to your feet! No! I said leave!
He's forcing them off to die in the water.
We just saw the head of MI6 get assassinated.
Yeah. Oxygen bubble.
Don't let the swords touch your skin! We've got to stop this flame from going down! The brake's not working! Someone's controlling this car and it isn't me!
Hey, yes, look. You all seen those?
What's going on here then? Well, it's difficult to say without tipping too far into speculation mode. Is Chris Chibnall and his team trying to write for an audience constantly on their phones while watching? Is the dialogue simplistic to appeal more to children? Are they trying to make it more accessible to a blind audience? I have no idea. The first is depressingly cynical. The second conjures up many thoughts that I have no time to go into about dumbing things down for kids. And the third doesn't make any sense because described video already exists. Either way, there are some truly inexplicable lines of dialogue in the Jodie Whittaker era, and it is driving me insane. So just for fun, here is a montage of some other bad lines that won't leave my fucking consciousness.
Why would you need to defend a holiday spa with an ionic membrane?
Me and your beautiful as your unborn child.
See this, Yaz? Antimatter drive. The thing with antimatter is you either have to find it or generate it. That's what this bit does. Particle accelerator.
I don't even like playing video games.
Nobody calls them a video game.
Right, dateline.
October 31st.
Halloween. Trick or treat. No, but the thing at CERN is massive.
In your time, generating antimatter costs a massive amount of money. This is progress. Things get smaller, faster, and cheaper. This is like the iPhone version of CERN.
But if morality was always your flaw.
Morality is a strength. Could be inside something. Oh, I hope it's not a liver. I hate being inside livers. People always get so offended. What are you doing in my liver again?
Hello, friends. Or should I say, plain thieves.
Accelerating enough particles to power this entire craft.
I promise I'll roll out the red carpet. It's red because it's drenched in the blood of our people.
The particle accelerator smashes the atoms together like a little antimatter factory to produce positrons. It's beautiful. Antimatter powering the movement of matter, bringing positrons into existence.
But at least we got each other, right? Granddad.
But we have to talk about character development, because everything I've said so far is mostly just academic. If the characters are enjoyable, well-rounded, and fun to watch, then I'd say most audience members would find themselves putting up with occasional bad dialogue and poorly structured plot. Unfortunately, the characters in Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who are none of these things. We're going to set aside our main ladies, the Doctor and Yaz, for now, because their character arcs tie into what I want to say about queer representation. And instead, we're going to focus on the men, that being the characters of Ryan, Graham, and Dan. Let's start at the very beginning. Jodie Whittaker's first series opens on Ryan delivering this monologue to camera in the form of a YouTube video.
So today, I want to talk about the greatest woman I ever met. Smart, funny, caring, special, proper special.
Ryan explains that he can't ride a bike because of his dyspraxia, a coordination disability. We meet Grace, his grandmother, and Graham, his step-grandfather, as they try to help Ryan learn.
Now, keep your eye on Grandad.
You mean Graham?
Keep your eye on Graham, then.
Ryan has clear resentment towards Graham for mostly unexplained reasons, but we'll go with step-grandfather as the main reason. Ryan falls off his bike, throws it over a cliff in frustration.
Ryan Sinclair, don't you dare!
And whilst retrieving it, comes across a giant Hershey's Kiss. I don't want to summarize the whole plot here, so let's just skip ahead and make note of the fact that Ryan accidentally lets the alien loose, the Doctor falls into a train, and they run around after this dude who collects teeth named Sim Shah, or as the Doctor calls him,
Tim Shaw.
Tim Shaw.
Tim Shaw.
Sim Shaw.
The point I want to make is that this first episode strongly establishes Ryan as our main character. He opens the episode's framing device, and he sets part of the plot in motion by releasing Tim Shaw. We also get insight into his struggles with dyspraxia, including difficulty climbing ladders, and this ableist comment from Graham.
I suppose you'll be blaming this on the dyspraxia as well. Can't ride a bike, started an alien invasion.
Graham?
Furthermore, at the end of the episode, we return to the framing device, where it's revealed that the greatest woman Ryan ever met is in fact Grace, and not the new female Doctor. This is because Grace dies at the resolution, falling off one of the cranes whilst trying to neutralize this electric tentacle thingy working for Teeth Guy. So it's not exactly great that we just set up an emotional arc for two men which heavily relies on the death of a black woman. But if you ignore that for 1 second, the general crux of Ryan's story still holds up. At Grace's funeral, we learn Ryan's mum died when he was young, and that his dad, who is Grace's son, is an absent father and skips the funeral. Grace is the one who essentially raised Ryan, and now he's grieving that loss. We also discover Graham, Grace's now widowed husband, initially met his wife whilst he was undergoing cancer treatment, and Grace was his nurse.
I had cancer, and, well, strictly speaking, I'm still in remission. 3 years gone. And Grace was my chemo nurse, that's where we met.
However, regardless of Graham's grief, we are still mainly focused on Ryan as our co-lead, on equal footing with the title character of the Doctor. This is fine. This is normal for Doctor Who. It's a decent setup, and while it does rely far too heavily on the fridging of a black woman, Ryan is likable and his struggles are relatable. which makes it especially galling that the rest of this arc pivots to being mainly about Graham's grief. I'm only slightly exaggerating here because Ryan does get a couple other moments of spotlight. He talks about being the one to find his mum's body when he was younger, for instance.
Massive heart attack, just out on the floor.
God. Who found her?
Me?
How old were you?
13.
I also think the two get about equal focus in the episode where they meet Rosa Parks, which is an episode I have a lot of problems with, but I do think it's interesting that they make Graham the white man who Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat for. Okay, that sounds weird when you say it out loud, but I thought it was an interesting way of showing how white people can be complicit in structural racism. I'm getting off topic though, that's a whole other video that I am not qualified to make in the slightest. Back to the point, after the first episode, the focus becomes bizarrely switched. Graham's arc is about grieving his wife, while Ryan's is about learning to call Graham Granddad?
Guess so. Don't argue with the wisdom of Graham, eh?
So we're sticking with Graham, are we, and not Grandad?
Yes, Graham.
But at least we got each other, right? Granddad.
Like, all of Graham's further character moments are structured around Grace. He sees her as an illusion when he goes back home, and in one episode, when the characters enter this dreamscape parallel reality type world, a version of Grace is there to tempt him to stay. Oh, Ryan doesn't enter said dreamscape parallel reality, by the way. He's off having his own subplot in that episode. This also happens to be the episode where he finally calls Graham Granddad.
Granddad.
In the finale of that series, we encounter Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem again, and Graham has this entire plot about wanting to murder him for indirectly killing Grace. He doesn't, in the end. He and Ryan just shove him into a sci-fi freezer, but it's indicative of the problems of this arc. The struggles with grief go to the white male character, while Ryan, who's black, has to learn to accept said white man as his granddad. Like, are we forgetting that Graham said that massively ableist thing to Ryan in the first episode?
I suppose you'll be blaming this on the dyspraxia as well. Can't ride a bike, started an alien invasion.
Graham?
Granddad.
If anything, Graham's arc should be about learning to become less of a dick to Ryan, not getting sad over his dead wife. There's a startling juxtaposition from the top of the series where Ryan was clearly established as the main character, with Graham in the supporting role. Ryan at least gets to take a bit more focus in the following New Year's special, which sees his absent father return. They go to lunch, and Ryan chews him out for skipping the funeral and abandoning him as a child after his mum died. But my thoughts on how that plot resolves itself are best summed up by the following scene, during which his dad is about to die from being possessed by a Dalek.
Dad, I'm here for you. I think of you. I love you, Dad.
Anyway, that was all the good character development. Or in other words, the character development that actually exists. Because, oh boy! Graham and Ryan managed to stay for one more season after this. What do they get up to in their sophomore run? Well, Ryan fails to shoot a basketball, but he gets it on point in the finale when he throws a large bomb. Graham expresses his anxiety about his cancer potentially returning, and that's it. They get next to zero focus and don't even get a chance to save the day. They just stand behind the doctor. Okay, there is also an episode about climate change where Ryan flirts with this girl who dies, and it slightly ties into a later episode where all the characters experience supernatural nightmares. Graham's is the aforementioned cancer returning, and Ryan's is leaving his friends behind. I'm going to bring up that episode in more depth later on, but nothing that happens in it survives past that one fleeting burst of character-driven storytelling. And the week after that, we return to absolute nothingness. When Graham and Ryan eventually do leave the show together, we see them atop the same hillside where Ryan was learning to ride his bike all the way back in episode 1. With Grace now a Force ghost, apparently. Lovely scene. Not remotely earned. If you've been paying attention, you may have noticed that I also forgot to mention Ryan's dyspraxia. Don't worry, that's because the show basically forgot it too. Oh yeah, there was also Dan. He comes in after Ryan and Graham. Dan, he wants to get a girlfriend. I guess. I'll be honest, I was going to talk more about Dan, but I'm not sure he gets anything resembling character development. He struggles to afford food. He likes Liverpool. All of this is essentially just video game flavor text.
Come on, Yaz. I'm calling you Yaz, because we're friends now.
Which brings me to the main reason I want to talk about this era of Doctor Who. The character of Yasmin Khan. Queer representation on the show has been an absolute travesty for the past couple years. Setting aside Yaz herself, it nearly outright tipped into queer baiting. In Series 11, for example, there are a bunch of gay characters that are introduced and then immediately killed off.
We're family, right? I mean, you're my... What are you again?
I'm your niece's wife, sir.
Exactly.
What's that?
Oh my God!
Who has access to the archives?
Today it's just me. Ooh. My secure digits in Yorkshire. That's what I told my boyfriend anyway. I probably shouldn't be telling you that. I'm new at this. Why?
The use of the bury your gays trope is bad enough in and of itself, but especially when these are among your only queer characters at all. Angstrom, from the Ghost Monument, does mention having a wife, who is dead. And there's also King James I being flagrantly bi, which is very fun, and I love Alan Cummings' portrayal of it, but it's a bit shocking when that's your best example of queer representation. What especially made it hard to swallow was this quote from executive producer Matt Stevens during promotion for the series. Since the show came back in 2005, I think Doctor Who has been amazing at blurring the edges of sexuality and being quite gender fluid about the characters and relationships. I'm not going to say if any of our characters are or are not at this point, but it is part, I think, of the DNA that Russell T Davies re-imbued into the show. There will be characters from across the spectrum.
That's bait.
Series 12 does step up a bit with the episode Praxeus, which gives us a happy ending for its central gay couple, so points there at least. Still, it's pretty telling that when the episode aired, most of the praise I saw heaped upon that aspect carried the tone of, "Oh my god, I can't believe they didn't kill them off." But aside from Yaz, these are the only queer characters in the entire era. Captain Jack does return for 2 episodes as well, but he's a returning character, not invented by Chris Chibnall. Also, he's played by John Barrowman, and he's controversial for playing practical jokes which involve getting his, John out on set, even after repeatedly being told not to, and apologizing for it. Yaz isn't insignificant, though. She's an integral part of this era. She's been in every episode since Jodie Whittaker took over as the Doctor, standing in the background mostly. However, it wasn't until the New Year's episode from literally this year, 2022, that we got explicit on-screen confirmation that not only is Yaz queer, she has romantic feelings for the Doctor. But to paraphrase the Talking Heads, well, how did we get here? When we first meet Yaz, she's a junior cop who wants more out of life than traffic violations and minor domestic disputes. As such, she's drawn into the Doctor's world through investigating alien sightings. Hello again, Teeth Man. We also learn Ryan and Yaz used to know each other from school. What other details do we find out about Yaz's life? Glad you asked. In the episode Rosa, we learn Yaz is apparently a practicing Muslim, potentially also proven by a series trailer in which she's eating what looks like vegetarian pizza. It's tenuous. 1 episode later, we meet her family. There's her father, her mother, and her sister, the latter who makes fun of Yaz for having no friends. But also, Yaz's friends are all weird.
What, you actually have friends? She always has the weirdest friends.
Great stuff. Yaz also once snuck into a boy's bedroom, to which Ryan says this.
Last time I sneaked into someone's room by a window was Danny Biswas in year 10.
You just went right down in my estimation.
All right.
Danny Biswas. He was punching well above his weight.
Did you just accidentally pay me a compliment?
Later, Yaz's mum asks if she and Ryan are together.
So, are you two
No.
In other words, Yaz and Ryan are pretty clearly being set up as a romantic pairing. Though to be fair, Yaz's mum does ask the same thing of the doctor, too.
Are you two seeing each other?
I don't think so. Are we?
We're friends.
Put a pin in that. All this comes in the first 4 episodes, and one trailer nobody remembers, so we haven't really gotten to the meaty stuff yet. If by meaty you mean table scraps. What should be Yaz's first big character episode ends up really skimping on the material. Demons of the Punjab, the 6th episode of Series 11, is about the partition of India and Pakistan, and in my opinion, it's one of the best episodes the show has ever produced. If you watch just one Jodie Whittaker episode, I seriously recommend this one. It is really great stuff. In terms of stuff for Yaz to do, though, well, it's less about Yaz and more about her family. Her grandmother in the present gives her a broken watch, which Yaz wants to know more about, and this leads our time travelers back to the partition in 1947. There we discover Yaz's young grandmother is engaged to be married to someone who is not Yaz's grandfather. The man, Prem, is even a Hindu as opposed to a Muslim. It's a genuinely emotional story about interfaith marriage and the brutality of the British Empire. Prem dies in the end, and Yaz's grandmother lives to eventually emigrate to the UK, and that's basically obvious from the start that this is what the episode is leading to. But for all that emotion, somehow Yaz is not at the center of it. It tries. Yaz sheds some tears and talks with her grandmother, but that's about it. For an episode which was clearly pitched as Yaz's first big character moment, it's shockingly devoid of any agency for her, or drama stemming from Yaz's lack of agency and helplessness in the historical situation.
I should say a reassuring thing now, shouldn't I?
Thus, we return to the episode that I mentioned in the section about Graham and Ryan, that being Series 12's Can You Hear Me? In that episode, the cast faces terrifying sci-fi versions of their nightmares, delving deep into their anxieties. That doesn't seem to track with me saying that the recent character work on the show has been so lacking. But don't worry, it's because this episode is about mental health. Nothing explored in this story seems to carry past its runtime, with the characters returning to their usual flat selves immediately afterwards. For one single episode, the writers were able to treat the characters as though they were real people, but it's only because they wanted the BBC announcer at the end to promote a mental health helpline. I talked briefly about Graham's cancer anxieties and Ryan's fear of abandoning his friends, and those don't really get brought up again either. But then there's Yaz. Oh boy, there is Yaz. In Can You Hear Me, it is revealed that Yaz once suffered so badly from depression that she ran away from home, and it was only because of a kindly police officer that she was rescued. This event changed the course of Yaz's life so much that she too decided to become a cop. I will now give you 3 seconds to guess how often this is brought up in future episodes featuring Yaz. That's right. Absolutely never again. The closest we come is a reference in the series before this one, with Yaz mentioning offhandedly that she used to be bullied in school.
I think I know what it is that's making you sick. I had it at my school where I'm from, when Izzy Flint turned the whole class against me.
But after Can You Hear Me? Never. Not once. This episode does provide Yaz with some much-needed character depth, but when that depth is confined to a single episode late into your second season, and nothing afterwards builds on that, that is pitiful.
Are you two seeing each other?
Which brings me, at long last, to the moment you've probably been waiting for. Thasmin. Yaz ex Doctor Who. The TARDIS lesbians. Often the biggest question surrounding the ship is, were they setting it up all along? To which the answer is pretty cut and dry. No. That's not even me editorializing, it's literally what Chris Chibnall and producer Matt Strevens have said. I didn't know what Thasmin was. Jodie said after the first season, oh, there's speculation out there, but we hadn't really thought about it. Chibnall in the Doctor Who magazine elaborated further with, it wasn't part of the plan. You're in a constant dialogue with the show because you see things come through and you think, that's interesting, we can slow burn that. And that's sort of what happened with this. If you want more evidence, consider the fact that Ryan and Yaz were originally being set up by the narrative. This bit is even in the script for episode 1, in which Chibnall describes a moment between Ryan and Yaz with the line, "What is that? Friendship, attraction, or just being stuck in the same place at an extraordinary time? It's deliberately vague, but it's there. But I hear you cry, because you are an attentive viewer. Didn't I make note of a scene where Yaz's mum asks Yaz if she's seeing the doctor? Yes. Yes, I did, because we first have to reckon with the idea that Thasmin was the intended endgame from the very first scene of the very first episode. No, not that scene. Also not Yaz's first scene. There we go. There are two scenes that are usually cited as evidence that Thasmin was endgame all along. The first is, as mentioned, Yaz's mum asking her daughter if she's seeing the doctor.
Are you two seeing each other? I don't think so.
The second comes a season later in the episode The Haunting of Villa Diodati, in which the TARDIS travellers meet Lord Byron and Mary Shelley and such. In that episode, Yaz talks to Claire Claremont, real-life lover of Lord Byron, and seemingly compares their romantic crushes.
You could try asking him.
I have. His answers only increase the enigma.
I know someone like that.
This enigmatic person of yours, would you trade them for reliable and dull?
My person's a bit different.
This would appear to be compelling evidence in favour of Thasmin being endgame all along, especially when you consider that Thasmin did indeed happen. The magazine quote from Chibnall that I read even goes on to mention these scenes by name. If you look at Arachnids in the UK, it's there front and centre in the scene where Yaz's mum asks, "Are you two seeing each other?" And the doctor asks, "I don't think so, are we?" It started to read on screen, maybe partly because of Jodie and Mandip's friendship off-screen, but partly because it just came through. We started making very deliberate decisions in terms of costume and started laying some things in. I remember Maxine Alderton, one of the writers, adding the line to The Haunting of Villa Diodati, where Claire asks about being an enigma, and Yaz says, "I know someone like that." So what's going on here? We have to return to the opening sections on setup and payoff. See, I wasn't just wasting time, I had a reason for it. I have a reason for everything. Despite Thasmin happening, and despite potential hints towards it happening, it was demonstrably not intended to happen, literally by the production team's own admission. If you look again at the quotes I read by Chris Chibnall and Matt Stevens, both men essentially admit that it was a treat for fans and they were won over by the chemistry between the two actresses. Some other writers may have toyed with it, notably The Haunting of Villa Diodati is not written by Chibnall and the scene itself is deliberately vague, but it was not the plan from the beginning. Plus, on the actors' side of things, there's this interview quote from Mandip Gill when asked about the rumours. "Me and the Doctor? I love it. You want a character and storyline, even if that storyline wasn't there, you want people to be talking about it. I don't want it to just stay on screen. I want people to relate to it or have seen something in our two characters that they think could go on a different journey. So to me, I'm here for it." And, well, I think that's fairly conclusive. Again, in those first few episodes, Ryan and Yaz are the ones being given that material.
So, are you and Yaz
Mates. We were at primary school together.
just mates then?
Yeah.
That's good.
Long-running TV productions, though, are another wrench in the works to consider in terms of the setup-payoff structure. You will very rarely get the chance to create a TV show with a detailed 3-season story arc already in your back pocket. And even if you do, a million things might go wrong, and probably will go wrong. One of your actors might decide to leave. One of them may even die. It has happened. The studio might demand something that wasn't part of the original plan. You might realize that the story isn't as interesting on screen as it was in your head, and find a different route to go down. Your show might just get cancelled. This, above all, is why Thasmin simply wasn't planned. They just weren't thinking that far ahead. When it eventually did come into play, a lot of the cited proof that it was always endgame is misunderstanding the production process. You can retroactively read into a lot of those moments, and indeed the writers will as they work on the series, but you can't deliberately set something up without knowing what you're paying off. While I was editing this video, a new issue of the Doctor Who magazine came out, and it featured an interview with Mandip Gill, which I'd also like to address some quotes from. In this brief bit about Thasmin, she says, "I also think it was touched on in the scripts quite early. Whether intentionally or not, I do think there were moments where the seed was planted, going right back to the first series, where Yaz's mum goes, 'Is that your girlfriend?' But I think it became bigger from the second series when it was touched upon more and more. I think people on set were aware of it at that point, and then it just so happens that it ends up in scripts." She also says here that she put in the extra looks because she could see it working for her character, coupled with the quote I read earlier where she literally says the storyline wasn't there. While it's clear that it ultimately didn't matter in the end, I basically have a running theory that it sounds like Mandip Gill liked Thasmin because it presented an opportunity to have, actual material to work with instead of the usual nothing she got. Now, whether the seeds for Thasmin were planted that early and it ended up feeling like a natural conclusion to make when it did come into play is a matter of opinion. But I think this proves that even though it was approached slowly within the narrative by both writers and actors, there was no slow burn arc plan from the very beginning.
Is it that obvious?
This is all nuts and bolts TV production, though. Yaz could be revealed as queer late in the game and it could still be good. It's not a bad instinct, after all, to go down the route of making your character gay. So what is the actual content of Thasmin on screen?
Can we just live in the present of what we have?
Yaz's character development is simply non-existent. She's a cop, she's Muslim, she had depression in a single episode, but like Dan later on, it comes across more as video game flavor text in lieu of making a rounded character. Yaz and the other companions of the era hardly get any focus, and it feels like they're only there because the writers felt that they had to be there. This extends to Yaz's actual queer storyline, which exists seemingly as an afterthought, rather than by any strong inclination to do it. In the episode Eve of the Daleks, Yaz admits to companion Dan that she has feelings for the Doctor and struggles to accept that. Here's that clip again for reference.
I don't know what to do, Dan. I've never told anyone. Not even myself.
Yaz then basically just spends the rest of the episode pining. The Doctor looks at Yaz like this. The episode ends. This plot carries on into Legend of the Sea Devils, where Dan is trying to get both Yaz and the Doctor to admit their feelings for one another. The Doctor has this to say eventually.
I think you're one of the greatest people I've ever known. Including my wife.
And after some badly filmed sword fights, they talk on the beach, and the Doctor says that she can't commit to people, but wishes this could go on forever.
Can we just live in the present of what we have?
While we still have it. I wish this would go on forever.
That's it. That's the Thasmin content. There is a popular fan interpretation that in Eve of the Daleks, Yaz's admission is not just one of repressing feelings for the Doctor, but of liking women in general. I like that idea, but I don't think it necessarily comes across on screen. There just isn't enough information to go on definitively. Yaz never gets to be the audience's perspective, so her thoughts and struggles are kept at arm's length from us. We can only infer, but we can never know. Perhaps in the right context, this kind of subtle storytelling would work, but with Yaz, the ambiguity feels sloppy and rushed. It's difficult to invest in her as a character when she continually gets next to nothing on screen. And you can still apply what I said about the inevitably changing production process and get a good result. Lots of long-running TV shows don't have a clue where their characters are going to end up, because they're writing one season at a time too. The difference, though, is being able to build on where the characters have been before and making that progression feel natural. It's wrong to say, for instance, that writers making it up as they go along is inherently bad. All writers are, really. Where that common criticism usually comes up, though, is when writers aren't as good at looking like they knew what they were doing all along. Such is the case with Yaz Khan and really a lot of the other characters in Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who. The making it up on the fly is more prominent than it should be, in its character development, and even in episodes like Kerblam, which is really just the whole problem with setup and payoff, but in miniature. It has a distinct first draft vibe, which lacks proper focus, emotional hooks, and competent structure. Thasmin didn't need to be set up in episode 1, but by the time it comes into play, the audience just hasn't been given enough to invest in Yaz as a storyline. And it could be so very easy to fix. In that first series, they could commit properly to setting up Yaz with Ryan, maybe tying it into the fact that Yaz, a Muslim, witnesses her grandmother hold a secret interfaith wedding. In the second series, maybe Yaz's depression returns with a vengeance and culminates in the reveal that she ran away from home once. Maybe Yaz and Ryan have broken up now, as a result of Yaz's mental health spiral leading her to push people away. And honestly, I think two exes traveling in time together would be a pretty interesting dynamic. By the third and final series, you could show Yaz beginning to properly realize her sexuality, her feelings for the Doctor, and repressing that, all before coming out to Dan. But now the problem is one of time. Thasmin only became canon-ish, they didn't really start dating or whatever, in 2022, and Chris Chibnall is leaving. Jodie Whittaker is leaving. Mandip Gill is leaving. Russell T Davies is about to become Doctor Who showrunner again. Between Yaz's coming out and Jodie Whittaker's regeneration, there's only one full episode. The story can't possibly be satisfying now, not when all the characters are on their way out. Thasmin is just a fleeting burst of potential at the end, relegated like everything else in this Doctor Who era to exist as a glimpse only into what could have been. From its character development to its queer representation to fucking Kerblam, Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who is a depressing waste and a travesty for the first female Doctor. You may be wondering, though, how does Yaz actually depart the show? Well, here's the thing. I'm filming this right now on October the 1st, and the final episode hasn't aired yet, so I currently do not know. I am, however, reasonably certain that the answer isn't going to be especially compelling, though, based on everything I've said thus far. So here's what's going to happen. This video will be live on October the 24th, the day after the final episode airs. In a few moments, I am going to skip ahead to the 23rd, where I will be explaining Yaz's ending soon after having watched it. After that, though, I, today, on October the 1st, will summarize what I think the most likely options are for Yaz leaving, and we'll see how close I got. Understand? Okay, let's flash forward to October the 23rd. Good morning! It is actually the 24th because I was too tired to film last night. So here's how Yaz left yesterday. After the plot is resolved, the Doctor is mortally injured and is beginning to regenerate. She decides to have one last trip with Yaz, and they have ice cream while they stare at the stars. The Doctor then says that she has to do this alone, and thus, despite the fact that Yaz said that she didn't want this to end, Yaz leaves. They don't even say goodbye because they decide that that would be too painful. Yaz is, in effect, forced out of the TARDIS by the Doctor, who wishes to regenerate alone. And Yaz stands heartbroken on the street. There is no kiss, there isn't even a hug. Yaz goes because she has to go. And now, back to October the 1st. And we're back on October the 1st. Here's how I think Yaz will leave. Thasmin, as it exists as a plot at all, will barely feature. Maybe the Doctor and Yaz will kiss, I doubt it. My read on the previous episode is that Thasmin is mostly just wrapped up as a plot strand, existing at the end to pad things out. There are three potential options then for Yaz leaving as I see it. Either she kicks the bucket, decides to leave, or is forced to leave. Dying, maybe I'm wrong, but that requires drama, and I've become very untrusting of Chris Chibnall's ability to write that. Also, it'll be bury your gaze, so if it does happen, you'll have just seen me yell about it. Deciding to leave the TARDIS, though, is more likely. The why is up in the air, but it's entirely possible that it might just be like Ryan and Graham's ending, which came at the end of an otherwise normal episode and fell absolutely flat. Like Ryan and Graham, Yaz might just decide, okay, it's time for me to leave. I'm not in the next era. Bye. Who knows? Being forced to leave, though, is a little different. It's possible that if Thasmin does exist at all as a plot, it'll be used as a way to write out Yaz. By the end of the episode, the Doctor will be regenerating, holding off the change. She may know it's coming, but other characters might not. If then Yaz is still around, the Doctor might just up and abandon her, and our last look at Yaz will be her standing heartbroken on the street. None of these ideas are especially good, but whatever it is, and you've just heard it, it won't be. It's too late for Yasmin Khan, and for Chris Chibnall's Doctor Who. Oh, and I didn't even mention the Doctor's character arc in this video, because that's a whole other can of worms. Stick around for part 2, because oh boy, you are not prepared.
Facial perception filter. Very easy to jam. Now they'll see the real you. Good luck.
You are not prepared.